Yo, what up, what up? Tominator here. So in this one I wanted to take a look at the 2018 Portugal Pro Show. This is the 212 division, and I gotta say I think that this is the most impressive lineup I've seen in this class in a long time. I mean, this is your top three. I thought they were all exceptional. So we got Angel, Calderon, something from Spain on the left. Never heard of the guy, but he really came in shape and he looked pretty good. Didn't really have a lot of weak points. Hadi Choopan, we've all heard of this guy by now. He's kind of like the next big thing in this division, and it's just so unfortunate that he can't get a friggin' visa to compete at the Olympia because he really should be doing battle with the six-time reigning champion Flex Lewis. That'd be an awesome head-to-head matchup. So he won the contest, of course. And then we had another, I believe, a relative newcomer, Nicolas Vullioud. I hope I pronounced his name right. He's from Switzerland. They're on the right. And I had heard his name thrown around and mentioned a few times coming into this show, so there did seem to be some hype built around the guy. And I can totally understand why, because in terms of his muscularity, his muscle bellies, his shape, just his overall thickness, man, this guy is thick as a brick. He's like a miniature Rolly Winkler in a lot of senses. So I can definitely see the appeal there and why people were excited to see him compete. And I thought that he was kind of like the surprise of the show, at least to my eyes, having never seen him before. So anyway, let's get into this. Let's go through these mandatories and break it down. So in the front double bicep, this is actually the one pose that I think Hadi is vulnerable in because it kind of exposes his flaws and his weak points. So namely the calves, number one. I mean, when you have some world-class quads like that, and I mean, those quadriceps can stand next to anybody in history, even in the open class, I think, because the combination of just mass and overall thickness with that deep separation is really, really unheard of. I mean, you hardly ever see that. But when you have really subpar calves, it's almost like he's standing on peg legs here, you know? So it throws off his proportions and his balance big time, so that's a weak point. I mentioned it in a posing routine video of Hadi on another channel that, you know, his conditioning was off the charts and his quads are just out of this world, but the problem is they're almost kind of overpowering the rest of his body, so it's out of balance, and in that sense, he's kind of becoming like the mini Big Rammy, you know what I'm saying? So it just kind of throws off his lines, unfortunately, so it's like too much of a good thing at a certain point. So the other flaw is, of course, the arms. You can see these short insertions on his biceps and his triceps. So that's always going to limit how much mass he can pack on there, and it's going to make his arms look a little undersized in certain poses, like this one here. And the forearms, of course, are also very weak. So in certain body parts like these, he can kind of get exposed, and you know, Nicolas is doing that here. Nicolas has much better calves than Hadi, so his legs are far more balanced. And his arms, you know, you can see the triceps, how much longer they are. Same with the biceps. His forearms are better, so he's just better through the limbs than Hadi in terms of muscle bellies, okay? Not in terms of conditioning, but just his genetic insertions. And I like the way he's hitting the pose as well, but he's not as conditioned. He's definitely softer than the other two guys, and he's holding more water than them, so that'll become more apparent as we go through the rest of the poses as well. He just wasn't quite as dialed in as these two. So the guy on the left, Angel, I actually think that you can make a case for him even winning potentially because his overall lines are probably the cleanest, the nicest. So that's obviously very subjective, but my one complaint about the dude, which I think most people would agree with, is that his arms are really not really doing it here. I mean, they're just a little too flat, a little too small, and I think that kind of costs him here. So, but if we're going by the standard criteria that the judges always seem to emphasize, the mass and conditioning, you got to go with Hadi, even in spite of his weaknesses. Okay, but in the front lat spread, I think Hadi just stomps these two. He really does, man. Like, he's got the widest lats, the most flare through the lats. He's really broad through the shoulders, so that's making his chest look the best as well. He's the only one showing any abdominal definition. I know that's not a requirement or even an expectation in this pose where most guys just kind of suck in their midsections, but, you know, it does add that element of definition that nobody else has here. And I think his legs now, you know, you don't notice the disparity between the quads and the calves as much. And I think that's probably just because your eye's more drawn to the X-frame, to everything else, and you don't really notice the calves as much. So I think he's running away with this pose. I think Angel has a good V-taper, and, you know, he looks solid in it. And Nicolas, unfortunately, this is a very poor pose for the guy. And it's just because the lats, man, the lats are almost non-existent. I barely see any V-taper whatsoever. I'm not sure what was going on here. Was he cramping or something? Like, it almost looks like he's not flaring them at all. Like, because we'll see when he turns around, man, this guy's got a wide back. He's got a lot of width through the lats, so I don't know what's going on here from the front, but we're not seeing any V-taper. So when your lats just don't look good in a front lat spread, you're not going to win the pose. Just simply put, that's all it is, you know. So it's too bad because the rest of his body looks pretty good. The arms, the legs, even the pecs look okay. Just the lats are letting him down. So yeah, I'd have Hadi 1, Angel 2, Nicolas 3 in that pose. I think that's pretty clear cut. I don't really think too many people can argue that. In the side chest, this is one where I think Nicolas actually looked really good though. Let me just back it up where Hadi's hitting it. Right there, okay. So Nicolas, I think, is actually filling it out the best. He looks the biggest, the most massive, just insane thickness and muscularity. He's almost like a miniature Rolly Winkler in this one, man. Like, he just looks huge. He's a monster. Look at the hamstring sweep. It's ridiculous. So my biggest complaint with him, though, in this one, and the reason I think he doesn't quite win it, is just the conditioning. I think Hadi's just harder. He's more defined. We see that. We see, like, the razor-sharp detail that he has upstairs, and look at the deeper split between the hams and the quadriceps downstairs, a better glute ham tie-in, more definition through the midsection, and I think his pecs stand out more, whereas in Nicolas's case, the pecs are kind of like an afterthought almost. You know, you barely notice them amidst all these other massive surrounding body parts like the delts and the arms, even the legs. So when we're talking about a side chest, the chest should really be the centerpiece of the pose, and it should be the thing that's popping out and grabbing your attention. And I think in Nicolas's case, it's kind of getting overwhelmed. So, you know, that and the conditioning are the two things preventing him from winning this pose. Mostly the conditioning, though. If he had Hadi's level of conditioning, I would give it to him in a heartbeat. But he doesn't. So Hadi takes it. Angel there actually looks pretty good. If we're going to just isolate the pecs for a minute and only focus on the chest here, you might even give it to him, because I think his chest on its own actually probably looks the best out of anybody's right now. But overall, he's just not packing the same level of muscle and mass as these other two guys, so he kind of comes up short in that regard. So yeah, I think that it's actually a good pose for all of them. When they turn around, though, so this is when we start to, at least to my eyes, this is when Nicolas's structural flaws really become apparent. And I'm talking about skeletal structure, not his muscle belly insertions and all that, because that's still great. But, I mean, just look at his legs, how short they look compared to his torso. So the proportions are immediately off there, and there's unfortunately nothing he can do about it. It's just the way he's built. But it kind of throws off his whole flow in the pose, his whole balance, his aesthetics even, to a degree. And it's unfortunate. So the other thing, too, is that his lats look extremely high here, and they look very weak and underdeveloped, especially compared to Hadi, and even compared to Angel. His lats just are coming up short, literally too, because they're too high here. You can see the insertions like in the middle of his back, so he doesn't have much density or muscularity through the lower half of his back whatsoever. Now, the upper half is very good. His traps are wide. They're very well developed. They're just kind of popping out at you. They look amazing. They're better than anybody else's. Even the shoulders and the arms are arguably the best in the picture right now. Now, Hadi's arms, as I already pointed out, are a weak point for him in these double biceps, but it's not quite as evident from the back as it was from the front, because now the forearms look a little bit better. The brachioradialis is being presented more, so it's kind of closing the gap that he has in his biceps there. And, you know, the triceps, the short triceps are still noticeable. We can still see Nicolas's are much longer, better insertions there. But it's just not as immediately obvious as it was from the front, I think. But downstairs, man, even though Hadi's calves are not on the same level as Nicolas's, I like his quads more. I even and his hamstrings. Now, I say quads because you can still see the sweep of the quadriceps, even from the back. And I think it's making his thighs look better. I think his hamstrings are a little bit more dialed in than Nicolas's. Nicolas's glutes are very good. You can see striations there. You can see that, you know, they're very well separated from his hamstrings and everything. But, you know, it's just, overall, I think Hadi's legs are much better. You know, they just kind of, quote-unquote, flow better, if you will. So Nicolas's, the other structural thing that I notice on the dude is that his waist is very narrow, but his hips are not, you know, so it looks a little funny. It kind of disrupts his flow. So you can see his waist is very tapered, very tight, and then the hips kind of flare out a little bit, so that throws him off a little in this one. But yeah, through the upper part of his back and his arms and shoulders, he's definitely winning. But the rest of his back, the structural flaws, they're holding him back. So I'd give that one to Hadi still. And this is what I was talking about, man. This guy's rear lat spread, it's like night and day from his front lat spread. It's so weird. Suddenly, he looks wide as a barn door. He's competing very favorably with Hadi. Hadi might, have to be a tad wider, but it's very close. They're pretty much on par. Hadi still takes it, however, of course, because, again, I think his legs look better from the back. And the extra detail through the center of his back is pulling him ahead here, if nothing else. Nicolas's back looks very smooth, very soft in comparison to Hadi's and even to Angel's there. So even though he's got a tremendous V-taper now, and it is very funny that his lats suddenly looked like they're inserting right down in the base of his spine, whereas we saw in the back double bicep that they looked very high. So it's a very strange phenomenon, and he's certainly not the only bodybuilder to exhibit this. Rolly Winkler also shows this same tendency where his lats look very high in the back double, but suddenly look like they insert much lower when he hits the lat spread. So I don't know what's going on there. I cannot explain this at a physiological level, but I'm no expert when it comes to anatomy, so maybe somebody else in the comments can explain it for us. But I think it's truly weird. But yeah, his back looks much better here than it did in the back double, I think. And I would still have Hadi 1. I would still have Nicolas 2 just for the width and the size of his back, and then Angel 3 there. In the side tricep, this is a pose that I really thought that Nicolas should have run away with. But he doesn't, because he doesn't execute it properly, man. It doesn't look right. He looks all scrunched up and hunched over. It looks just off, man. And you can kind of see his back poking out there. I mean, he should be dominating because his triceps are so much bigger and meatier than Hadi's. And his, look at the hamstring sweep again. His lower body looks amazing. But Hadi just looks so much more composed in this one. He looks so much more relaxed and confident. And, Nicolas just looks awkward. So Hadi takes it. He's also, with that conditioning, he has a better overall polish to his physique, of course, as well. In the ab and thigh, this one also I thought would be closer because they both have amazing legs, especially through the quads. Nicolas definitely his calves are better, but the way Hadi's overlapping his legs like that kind of masks the subpar calves. You don't notice it as much. And what you do notice is that his midsection is better. He's got pretty much a picture-perfect six-pack, whereas Nicolas, while his abs are very defined, just in terms of shape, in terms of the individual segments of his abdominals, they're not lining up as cleanly, and, they just don't look, his midsection just doesn't look as good as Hadi's. It's just a genetic thing. There's nothing he can really do about it, but it is what it is. So I think Hadi takes this one comfortably, even though their legs, through the thighs measure up very well to each other. Nicolas's are still huge, pretty much on par with Hadi's in terms of size, or damn close enough, man. And he's got good separation through the quads. We can definitely see that. But Hadi's are still just that much sharper. They're that much more deeply separated. And I think Angel over there also looks to be in better condition than Nicolas. So, but I would still go Hadi 1, Nicolas 2, Angel 3. I think it's pretty clear. And this is another pose that I really thought Nicolas would pull ahead, the most muscular, because his arms are better, man. But no, Hadi outdoes him here too. Why? Because of the extra width, through the delts. That's making his pecs look much bigger and fuller and just better. The whole flow of the pose looks better because his arms aren't coming out at a weird angle like what Nicolas's are. Nicolas's pecs look really pinched here. Again, the midsection's not as good as Hadi's, and he just looks narrow compared to Hadi. Even his edge in the forearms and in the biceps, I mean, when you just focus in on those two muscle groups, you would expect Nicolas to pull ahead, but no, they look damn near identical in this pose. So the only real edge he has here is the triceps still, and that's not enough. So I think Hadi is easily winning this comparison. And in the crab, so Nicolas doesn't hit the crab, Hadi does. I think that's a mistake on his part. It reminds me like when Kai Green hit this pose. It was just never a good look for him. Some guys just aren't suited to hitting certain poses, and especially when a pose is not mandatory, like the most muscular, you have options. There's no need to hit the crab. Hadi should not do it in the future because now his arms just look small. They look a little bit, the shape-wise, they look off. and he's not doing himself any favors. I thought he looked much better in that previous most muscular we just saw, and he looks better when he hits the hands on hips as well. So I don't think there's any point in him doing the crab. In order to pull off the crab, you really need to have a good lateral head on your triceps and a good long head for the sweep as well, which Hadi does not have. And if you're going to have peaky biceps, then you better have a good brachioradialis to kind of close that gap. And Hadi doesn't have that either. So it's just not a pose that he's suited to hitting, and I think it's his weakest variation. Now, Nicolas with the hands on hip, I don't know why Nicolas didn't hit the crab. Maybe he looked even worse than that, but I thought that usually guys that are arm dominant tend to fare well in the crab. So, but he doesn't hit it. And in terms of the hands on hip, again, his chest just looks too scrunched, and he looks too narrow through the shoulders. Now, Hadi's hands on hip there, I think, is beating him pretty clearly. So that's what's up, guys. That's all the footage I have to go through. And, yeah, I think it was a pretty clear-cut win for Hadi Choopan here. And but I'm still very impressed by Nicolas Vullioud and even Angel there, who, two guys I've never seen compete, and I was definitely surprised and pleasantly so. So I thought this was a great show for this division and a compelling lineup. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below, everybody, and thank you for watching. Until next time, I'm the Tominator signing off, and I'll be back.